back to wheels and things. Today is a big day because we are going to do a timing belt service on my Fiat 500 Abarth. And I don't have any mechanical official automotive training, but I've got technical data, I have a little bit of mechanical know-how, and got some tools and parts, so we're going to give it a go. Let's jump right in and I'll show you what parts I have. So over here I have some parts needed for the timing belt service. The big one here is the water pump and timing belt kit. If you actually look on the actual sticker, it includes a timing belt tensioner, a timing belt, and a water pump. Supposedly this uses an OE manufactured timing belt, but I got this from Rock Auto as most of the parts. This is the actual tool to hold the timing in the engine secure while we're changing the timing belt. So this one I just got off of Amazon. I was actually pleased that it includes this guy, which is to re-tension the tensioner once you're done with the service. It comes with all the bolts. This is for the camshaft, this is for the crankshaft. There's only one camshaft. And yeah, it comes with all the bolts to mount it. So looks like a pretty complete kit. This guy is a pulley holder that can hold the camshaft pulley in case I need it. I'm not 100% sure I'm going to need it yet, so we'll hang on to that and see if we need it. This guy is a new serpentine belt. I figured since I'm taking the old one off, it's an inexpensive part, so I'll just put a new one on. And of course, when we do the water pump, we're going to drain all the coolant, so we need some new coolant. There is one part that is not here yet that I kind of realized I needed late, as it is with car projects. You always get in the middle of it and you realize you're missing a part, but apparently the vacuum pump is going to come off, and it's recommended that you replace that gasket between the engine block and the vacuum pump when you every time you pull the vacuum pump off. So I've got another gasket coming for that, but we're going to go ahead and get started anyway. Over on this side of the bench, I've got my tools hanging out back here, and I have my laptop because that is where all the data is. That's going to tell me how to do this timing belt service. I'm using alldatadiy.com. I already gave them a plug in a previous video, so if you want to hear more about them, you can go check it out in the oil change video. But basically, I can for 1 year I pay about $30, and I have access to all the official service data. One thing I have noticed is a lot of the service data isn't specific to the turbo engine that's found in the Abarth. It's just specific to the naturally aspirated version. So far it hasn't been a real problem, but a couple of differences that I've noticed are the air intake system is different on the turbo model for obvious reasons. So basically I just have to take that into account when I disassemble that. It doesn't show it the same on here, but it's the same engine block underneath, so really not a big problem so far. We'll see if it causes more of a problem as I work on this, but that's why I've got this here. All right, so I've got the car lifted up. I put it on ramps, except for the timing belt service, I will have to take off the right front wheel to get to the timing belt and water pump on this side of the engine. And so I do have jack stands supporting this side of the car, and I just have this ramp it's just there for safety at the moment. I just have it under the wheel in case anything were to happen. Anytime you're working on a car, it's really important to make sure you don't crush yourself. That happens to people, and it's kind of dangerous. So I've got 3 wheels on ramps, and I've got 2 jack stands over here, and I've got this under it for safety until we take the wheel off. I'll have to get under the car to drain the coolant and take off the under tray and do a few things before we take the wheel off, so that's why that's there. I'm just getting started. The first thing I did was to release the pressure from the fuel system, and the way you do that is by taking the fuel cap off, going over here to the fuse box, 1 7mm bolt opens that up, pull the fuel pump fuse, crank the car over, and turn the car back off, put the fuse back in, put that away. Basically, get any fuel pressure out of the system. In my case, the car didn't even actually start once I pulled that, so assume that the pressure has been released. Probably more a procedure if you drive the car into a shop and it's been driving for a while, they need to make sure that's done. The next thing I did is I removed the battery. Interesting battery, so 10mm bolts to take off the terminals, and then it's actually not held down by a strap. There's a foot at the bottom that clamps the bottom of the battery down. I haven't seen that before, but one 13mm bolt loosens up the battery so that it can be lifted out. All right, we're going to start taking other things apart now. Start taking stuff off the engine. Okay, so first thing you do, 3 8mm bolts, take off this. Careful, the air filter lives under it. I already took it off. Then take apart the turbo inlet housing, just like we would if we were doing an oil change. Set those aside. This guy right here comes off. One 8mm bolt right here. Slides this out. Then, as I mentioned, I already took this part off. This guy, I already pulled it up, but it basically has 4 spots where it kind of just snaps into place. And so you pop those 4 spots off. You'll need to take this hose off, but then this guy just lifts right out. And that's the air assembly. So didn't have to take that apart too much to get it out. I'm going to go ahead and take off this little piece of the turbo inlet right here, like I did for the oil change, just because it'll give me more room. Here's the timing cover right here, and this is the engine mount that's going to have to come off. But actually pretty simple to get to the plugs and coils on top of the engine. I thought it was going to be a little bit more work than it actually was. Okay, so it hasn't taken me long to hit my first real snag. So I got the airbox off. I got this off. This is the air oil separator. It sits right here. You just need to disconnect this hose, take 3 bolts out, and reposition that. Pretty simple. I left this one hose connected. Then you got to take this, make sure you can see that. Yep, this is the bracket that holds the oil separator. There's 1 nut here, 1 bolt going in this way here, and there's 1 bolt down here. The instructions just to say to reposition this, and I can understand that because there's a bunch of cables hooked to it over here. Actually, since I'm just repositioning it, I was originally going to try to remove it, but man, there's a ton of wires connected to it, and they all have different clamps, and I'm afraid that if I keep trying to pull them off, I'm going to break all these plastic clips, and then the wires are just going to be floating around. So basically you just take this off and try to move it out of the way as much as possible. Maybe I will take that 1 wire back out. There we go. But basically, and disconnect this vacuum line here from this. Be careful not to snap this guy off. He's very important. This goes to the brakes. This is the vacuum pump. Sits on the end of the camshaft here. So where I'm hung up is that these bolts are, I believe, Torx. I believe they're Torx bolts. I don't know what size, and I don't have the correct size. So pretty much everything so far has been 10mm. Oh, one other thing that tripped me up, but I got past it, was there's a bolt that goes into the end of the block here. I really didn't want to have to remove all this, so I was able to remove these 2 bolts and the heat shield. And then this part behind here was able to flex out of the way enough to get this bolt out. Otherwise, the bolt just backs up into the side of the heat shield, and there's just not enough space to pull it out. So thankfully I didn't have to pull this whole heat shield apart just to get that 1 bolt. So this guy's out of the way. And next thing is to get the vacuum pump off, but I don't have the right tool for that job. So kind of stuck at the moment. So I'll have to go to the store and resume this another time. Hello again, it's a new day, and now I have a set of Torx bits, which you will definitely need, specifically a T30 and a T45. At the moment, I'm trying to do 2 things. 1, I need to drain the coolant still, and 2, I need to remove the vacuum pump, which is right here. This one takes a T45, and to get the bumper cover off to get to the radiator to drain it takes a T30. So you're really not going to get too far without having Torx bits. It's later in the day. It's been a little bit of a struggle, actually a lot of a struggle for me to get the coolant to drain, but as you may or may not be able to hear right now, it is finally draining. So the trick is, at least in this 2012, some people online say that there's differences later on, but there is a drain cock on the driver's side of the front of the radiator. The trick is you have to crank that thing really hard to get it undone. I was afraid I was going to break something, and I finally searched around online, saw a video of someone using some pliers to really crank on it. So that's what I had to do, and it finally started draining. I also briefly stuck the battery back in and allowed the heater to turn on to try to hopefully get the coolant out of the heater core as well. It's slowly draining, so I'm going to leave that going for a little while. In other news, I got the vacuum pump off once I had the proper Torx tool. I took this wheel off over here. Obviously, I've taken the front bumper off. For whatever reason, on the front bumper, the DRLs down here, there's a plug for this guy, a plug for the side marker on both sides. Those are super easy to get off. There's a plug for the fog lights, which for the life of me, I could not figure out how to get separated without breaking it. I don't know why it's not the similar tab. You just push a tab and it pops off. It doesn't work like that. So I've got the bumper hanging there, sitting on this recycle bin, since I can't figure out how to get that one undone safely. But other than that, things are actually progressing. I got the wheel off. I got the, I'll take some footage over here, but I pulled back the wheel liner, so now I can see the accessory belt. And so the next thing is, after I get the coolant drained, we'll take out some of the stuff here so we can get to this timing cover, get this engine mount off. A lot of stuff to remove on this side of the engine to get to what we need to. This side of the engine is good to go. We got the vacuum pump off. And unfortunately, it's the camshaft is 180 degrees off from where I want it to be. So I'll have to take everything off over here and then crank the engine around with a ratchet to get this in the correct position. So disassembly is continuing, and we're making progress slowly but surely. Just taking a little while to get familiar with the car and figure out where everything is. I'd say the one thing about this car is, as you can see, this engine bay is really tiny. Everything is really packed in there. It is hard to get to things. I've definitely nicked my hands a couple times. It's just hard to get your hands up in there. So here's what's going on this side of the engine. The other side of the engine bay is a little less exciting, but basically there's a bolt here and a bolt back here. After I drain the coolant tank, remove that. I'm not taking the hose off the bottom because it's got a kind of permanent clamp, so just take it out of the way. Then that leaves us with, let me get the flashlight out here. So right here, there was an engine mount that connected this part of the engine with this part of the frame. 315 and 314 millimeter bolts to remove that. Then over here, got the timing cover and what's left of the engine mount. Still working those bolts out. But next thing I need to do is get the serpentine belt off, which I don't know if you can see, but yeah, there's the top of it right there. Get that guy off, get the rest of this thing off the timing cover. We're getting really close to actually seeing the timing belt, so that's exciting. All right, it's getting later in the day and finally figuring out how to get everything apart. Got the coolant drained, got the motor mount off the right side, got the top of the timing cover off, got the serpentine belt off, working on getting the vibration damper off. That one was a challenge. I did end up needing this tool to basically hold the engine in place while I loosen the vibration damper down here on the bottom, or basically the crankshaft pulley. It's all one piece. Yeah, so I've got the vibration damper loose. I'm going to note the position so that I can put it back on the right way so it doesn't vibrate. And the next thing I'm going to do is finally get to the point where I can put start putting the timing tool on and get everything set up to take the timing belt off. One thing I'm still having difficulty with, which I'll show you, is the final piece of the motor mount that covers the timing belt. I'm going to have to do some serious raising the engine up and lowering it back down to get all the bolts out. There's one nut that's still on there that I can't get to until I get the vibration damper off. So hopefully piece by piece we're almost getting there. All right, thought I'd just take a second to show you where we are. Again, coolant bottle is loose, but hard to see down there. So you can see the top of the timing belt right here. This is the last piece, this metal thing right here, this is the last piece of the motor mount that I'm having trouble getting off. All right, down here's the vibration damper. I've got the 3 bolts on it loose. Obviously don't want to loosen the crankshaft bolt in the middle. There's 1 bolt up under here for that last motor mount that I was showing you. And then there's the timing belt cover. There's a timing belt cover. I've got the 1 bolt for that out, so I just got to take the damper off. Hopefully I'll get the cover off, and that last motor mount will be a challenge because the bolts don't slide all the way out because there's not enough room between the engine and the frame over here. So we'll see what we can do to get that out. Otherwise, everything's going well. Okay, it's time to put on the timing tool. One thing to notice about the timing tool is that there is a very small lug on this side, and it will not sit flush unless the indexing hole on the camshaft lines up with this lug. So if it's not, you got to spin the engine over, or at least the crank over once to get it 180 degrees the other way. The way I did it is I stuck this on there, no bolts in it, and I kind of just adjusted the engine until by turning the bolt on the crankshaft until this lines up, and then I'm going to bolt it in. So I'll give some detail video on that. All right, so there you can see the camshaft down in there, and you can see that indexing hole. It's toward the back of the car right now, and you can see how when I turn this around this way, it will line up. So right now I have it on that side. So basically I'm going to stick this on here, and you can see it's not, there you go, you can see it's not perfectly aligned. So I'm going to have to rotate the engine just a little bit to get it to line up better. So to do that, take me a ratchet down here and turn this basically twice as far as I want that to go. Oh, a little hard to do with one hand. All right, come back up here. Kind of fell down a little bit. That's pretty close. Let's see if I can get a bolt in here. Not quite. So it needs to go back just a little bit. Went a little bit too far. All right, I just got the camshaft timing plate in place and secured. I still need to take the vibration damper off, the rest of the timing cover, that 1 engine mount, and then I should be able to use the other half of the tool to hold the camshaft in place. Then I can remove the timing belt and the water pump. Okay, we're finally here. We have all of the timing tools in place. I got everything off. This guy was the biggest pain in the butt to get off. This is the part that bolts to the engine. There are actually, the tech data claim that there were 6 bolts, but there's actually a 7th nut down here. I don't know if that was maybe a change between other years, but this guy was hard to get off. There's not much space, and especially to get like into here. So there's a lot of jacking the engine up and then letting it down to get to different bolts. Thankfully, there is a relief in the frame to get some of these middle bolts out. Otherwise, there would just be no room to pull them out. But I had to jack the engine as far up as I could to get this thing out from between the engine because the timing belt runs in this channel here. But I think it's all done. I've got the cam timing tool on up top, got the crankshaft one on the bottom, and got the timing belt completely exposed and water pump. So should be the very last step. We're going to release the tensioner nut and take the timing belt off. All right, just a little detail of what's going on down here. You can see we've got the cam timing tool on there. There is a little index right here to make sure you put it on the right way. and thankfully it lined up. Within a very small tolerance, I did have to crank on the 15mm nut here on the camshaft to get it perfectly aligned, but I would expect that to be within tolerance of the tensioner and all that. There's the water pump up there, and looking in from the top, here's obviously the camshaft pulley right up top, and that thing with the gold nut on it is the tensioner. So we're going to loosen that guy, and the timing belt should come off. And again, we have the cam timing tool on over here, covering up where the vacuum pump usually is. All right, so we've got everything apart. Got the water pump area cleaned up. There was a lot of RTV on the old one. It was sealed with RTV. New water pump came with a gasket. However, after doing some reading and the instructions that came with the water pump specifically, those said that I needed to use gasket sealer on this. So I went to the store and looked around, couldn't find gasket sealer, but I found gasket maker, or RTV, which is what was used on there before. So I think I'm going to skip the gasket. The metal casting looks identical to the one that came off, so I'm going to put a bead of gasket maker in this channel here, and we'll use that to seal this on. So I was hoping to use this gasket so I could just slap it on there and it would be good to go. But the RTV is going to take 24 hours to cure, so now that this project has gone into the week, it's going to be not as much time that I have to work on it, so that'll be fine. So we'll lay the bead of RTV, we'll finagle it down in there correctly, actually this direction. We'll get all the bolts hand tight and just let it slightly squeeze out. And it says to let it sit in that position for an hour, and after an hour torque it down and then let it cure for 24. All right, you can see the new water pump up in there. Pretty pleased with how it came out. From the top up here you can just see the RTV. Let's get this coolant bottle out of the way. You can just see the RTV coming out around the edge there. So I think that did a really nice job. Check to make sure it can spin freely. Yep. Nothing obstructing the water pump. All right, the water pump is on and torqued. So now I'm reinstalling the timing belt. Before I put the tensioner on, I'm supposed to loosen the camshaft gear here. So you definitely need one of these. There's an official MOPAR part that actually bolts to the camshaft to hold it in place, but this should also do the trick. And a 18mm socket to loosen that guy up so that basically that way the belt is not preloading the cam one way or the other. It's with the timing tools in place, it should be set perfectly. And they actually have you loosen it, install the tensioner, tension the tensioner, tighten everything down, and then tighten this bolt down last. And then you remove the timing tools and then you check that they go back in, basically. So hopefully this won't take multiple times of doing this to get it right, but basically you want to make sure the timing is perfect. All right, timing belt's in, camshaft gear is loose. I'm going to install the tensioner and tension it. There's a little metal tab here that as I tension it should move into this little gap right here. That lets me know it's at the proper tension. I'm very close. If there was like a foot of space here, this would be easy. Okay, so good news. Installed the timing belt, rotated the engine twice. I adjusted the tensioner. As the belt centers up, it gets rid of any of that last little slack, so I readjusted the tensioner, spun it again. Tensioner was good. Threw the timing plates back on. Timing is perfect. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to take the timing plates back off and start reassembling everything. The only thing I have to wait for now is I do have to wait 24 hours for the water pump gasket to cure before I can put coolant in or water and do a coolant flush and run it again. But literally everything else can go back together. I am still waiting on the vacuum gasket that goes right here. It should come tomorrow, so that would be the only other thing that's keeping me from starting the car. Okay, good afternoon. It is officially, I guess, day 4 of this project. That's not full days, thankfully, but it is the 4th day I'm working on this car. The good news is that late last night, I got the timing belt on, I got everything set up, timing was perfect. So after I get that done, I was just on a roll. I put the lower timing cover back on. There's 3 parts to the motor mount. There's a part that bolts to the engine block. There's the top of the timing belt cover, and then there's a third part that connects the engine mount that mounts to the block and the engine mount that mounts to the frame. So got that on there. And then the last thing over here was to mount the coolant tank. The other thing that I did was I got the serpentine belt on. I was going to replace the serpentine belt, but I found out that I think someone has installed maybe a different tensioner on there, which requires a different belt length than the standard length. I didn't really want to troubleshoot that right now. It's working, it's on there. So the belt that's on here is longer than it should be for some reason, but it works and it's properly tensioned. So rolling with that. After I got the serpentine belt done, vibration damper back on, it was just a couple plastic covers, wheel well liner, and a single metal bar. Then I threw the wheel back on, so that's down and torqued. So it's no longer sitting on jack stands. It's on 4 wheels up on these ramps. So basically what's left to do is take care of this part of the engine bay, throw a lot of my parts back on. Then the fun part, which I may save for another episode, is going to be the filling, flushing, filling, bleeding coolant. And I bought a special tool for that. I wasn't planning on it, but after reading the tech data, reading what other people have said, it sounds like having a vacuum unit to get the coolant filled is really the way to go. Otherwise, it sounds like you'll be burping bubbles out of the coolant system for quite a long time. So we're going to give that a go. If I sounded tired last night, it's because I was. It was getting close to midnight. But like I said, I actually got quite a bit done, and we're getting close to the end. All right, and after only like 15 more minutes, she's all back together. It was actually pretty straightforward. Everything went back on as I expected, had all the fasteners, don't have any extras left over. Good project. Obviously, you see it's not totally back together. Still have to fill, purge the coolant, and I'm probably gonna flush the radiator a couple times. The only thing that would prevent me from doing that is the drain cock on the radiator. It took a lot of force to get it open, and it's showing signs of plastically deforming the plastic, aka, it starts to turn white and gets stretchy. Looks like it's not going to go back, or it might break off soon. So it does make me nervous because, as far as I can tell, if I broke the little drain, I would probably have to replace the whole radiator. So I'm going to be really careful with that. I'm going to try to close it up. If it looks good and it looks like I can open and close it, it will. I'll probably flush some distilled water through the system, run the car, really flush out the radiator since it probably hasn't been done. And then I'll finally fill it up with coolant, and then we should be all done. So I'll probably save that for the next episode. So stay tuned at some point in the future. We'll talk about how to fill and flush the coolant. So thanks for watching Wheels and Things. Be sure to check in next time, like and subscribe. Thanks.